The raid of Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida was a big news story, all the legal implications for Donald Trump. But what I focused on is Donald Trump's simple passport mistakes. And today I'm going to tell you what those are and how you can avoid them to not only claim a second citizenship you may not even know you're entitled to, but to make sure that you're making the most out of the passport that you already have. And so obviously we know that Donald Trump's passports were seized, which, side note, is proof that you don't own your passport. The government owns your passport. They can cancel it at any time. They can take it away at any time. It is the property of the government. And so if you want to make sure that you have the ability to move around the world, that's why we talk about having a second citizenship. That's why we talk about living overseas, not so you can go off and do a bunch of nefarious stuff, but that so when normal administrative issues happen or when your government becomes really authoritarian, you have options. But what I want to talk to you about today are more simple steps that anyone can take to make sure that you are making the most of your passports, because most people aren't doing this. If it's your first time here, I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And so the big mistake that I see with Donald Trump's passports is that he had 3 different passports. I think 2 were connected to his time in the government. Only one of those passports was active, and so that's already a strike. So a simple thing to do is to make sure that your passport is active at all times. And so if you're a U.S. citizen, most U.S. citizens don't have a passport. And so this is kind of a common misconception. Citizenship is something that you have that makes you a citizen of the country. That means that you can live there, you can work there. They're not going to kick you out at some point, obviously, right? But just because you don't have a passport doesn't mean that you're not a citizen. If you are a citizen, though, you should have your passport at all times. What you want to understand is that if something were to get harried in your country, if you wanted to go somewhere else, it may take a while for your country to issue you a passport. Not under general circumstances, although certainly there are countries where I'm a citizen where I can get a passport in a day. That's not possible in the US or Canada or other Western countries. But look at what happened during COVID. People were waiting over a year to get a passport. I was doing deals with folks who had to delay deals because they didn't have a passport number, because they let their passport go too long. From a travel perspective, you have to understand that many countries will require up to 6 months of additional validity on your passport from the day you're expected to leave. And so if you're going to a place where they just automatically assume you're going for the full, let's say, 90 days, they may want a passport in some cases that's valid for 9 months from your date of entry. And so if you're kind of running it down to the last days, that's not a good idea. And if you simply don't have a passport, you're letting it expire, I don't need to travel soon, that's just not a smart idea, because again, we've seen how long the government has taken to issue passports in some cases. And so renew all of your passports. That includes passports that you used to have. And so people think that you're only a citizen when you have a passport. You cannot tell you how many folks I've talked to, and they said, oh yeah, I used to have a Brazilian passport, or I used to have, whatever passport. I'm like, well, simply not renewing your passport doesn't mean that you're not entitled to a passport anymore, as we've seen in the aforementioned example, right? Someone got a passport to go on a trip. It was good for 10 years. After the 10 years, they weren't traveling. They just kind of let it expire, so they've got an old expired passport. Doesn't mean you're not a citizen anymore. And so we understand that fundamentally in the country that we're born in, that we live in, right? You're born in the United States. You're living in the United States. Well, of course, they're not going to kick me out just because I don't have a passport. But what if you were born in another country? What if your parent was born in another country and you had a passport when you were a child, for example? I had that with someone close to my family, where the child, now an adult, had a passport that was attached to their mother's passport when they were a kid. That's how it used to work in their country. And they didn't even realize they were a citizen of that country. And so later they were able to go and apply and just get a passport. They didn't have to apply for citizenship. The country already realized they were a citizen, okay? And so if you didn't lose the citizenship, you still have it. Now, certain people, if you moved from Germany to the United States, for example, and you naturalized in the U.S., Germany may have asked you to give up your citizenship, right? Or if you moved to Singapore and you naturalized there years ago, Singapore would have said, hey, give up your passport, unless for some reason, like you're from Argentina or sometimes France, and it's not practical. But as long as you didn't really give up that citizenship, you probably still have it. And so if you had another passport, I'll tell you a story. Have a friend whose wife had a Brazilian passport, I think through a parent. Had the passport at one point, but didn't have it for 15 years. Went into the embassy, and they were kind of like freaked out, like, you don't speak Portuguese, like, you haven't, like, how do we know? But hey, here's my documents. I'm entitled to this passport. Give me the passport. And so it was actually kind of a problem for her because she hadn't been renewing it, and then she had to go in without like any other passport to give. She had to bring like a birth certificate. There's just kind of a roundabout way to get it because she had never kept up that Brazilian passport. She thought, oh, I have this other good passport. Like, what do I need it for? Well, I think that other good passport happened to be Israel, right? So if I had to choose, like, in a time of crisis in the world, yeah, people are probably going to be more chill with the Brazilians than with the Israelis in many parts of the world. And so I would want to have at least the optionality to be able to go somewhere as a Brazilian and not have to go as an Israeli. And so keep those up to date. If you were born in another country, I've seen people who their parents were vacationing in Mexico or their parents were living in Mexico, as long as they weren't like diplomats. If you were born in some country that has citizenship by birth, you are a citizen. And so I see this with folks where they're like, no, but I was just kind of visiting. Most countries in the Americas, these days Colombia and Chile are some of the more strict or just don't allow it. Historically, most countries in the Americas allow it. Fiji, I think Pakistan. If you're giving birth to a child now, by the way, and you're a resident of Portugal, after 1 year, they can be a Portuguese citizen. Basically, you're a resident for 1 year, then you give birth there. But generally speaking, for most folks, if you're born somewhere in the Americas, you're entitled to that passport. And so if you're not aware of that, just go and apply for that passport based on the birth certificate that you were born there, and you will have that. Again, having optionality. The other thing is, if your parents were born somewhere, so here's another Donald Trump mistake. Donald Trump's mother was born in Scotland. Is he entitled to citizenship in the UK? If you're entitled to it, why wouldn't you claim it? Go through the citizenship by descent process. For most cases that we look at in the UK, you could just go through a parent. There are some cases where you can do like a double descent, but generally speaking, the UK and other more northern European countries are more strict on, hey, if your parent had it, you can have it. But when you look at countries in Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, you can go back sometimes as far as 3 generations. Okay, so Poland also, Slovakia, Hungary, you can go back further in your family tree, Lithuania, Latvia, and so why wouldn't you claim that? You may already have it in some cases. Again, in certain parts like in Eastern Europe, you may have already been in a parent's passport back in the day, and so just go back and claim that. Otherwise, go through the process of claiming the citizenship. And so why would you want to give up those passports? Why would you want to not have access to those, right? You may have also lost citizenship in the past due to dual citizenship restrictions. And so, for example, in Georgia, I know a few folks who had parents from different countries. They were born in Georgia, they were Georgian, and they were something else, and they eventually had to make a choice because Georgia didn't allow dual citizenship. Same with Norway and other countries. Australia, even up until about 2000, really didn't allow dual citizenship. Japan, for example, they still don't. But if your country, like Georgia, like Norway, like Australia, opened up dual citizenship and you lost that, we've helped people go back and be like, hey, Georgia, like some of my friends, I had this citizenship and I chose to get rid of it, and so now I'm going to go get it again. And so they'll go to the other country and they'll get it. Or they give up Georgian, and now that Georgian's a better citizenship, hey, I'm back, and give it to me back. And yeah, I'm this other citizenship, but that's okay. And so the bottom line is you want to make sure you're claiming all the passports you're entitled to. Some people don't realize that they already may have a passport. Had someone recently that we were helping out. I said, do you have any claim to citizenship by descent? No. I said, where were your parents born? My mother was born in Mexico. Great, she's Mexican. No, but she was just born there. She's Mexican. And then you can go and claim that Mexican as well. So you want to make sure you're claiming all the citizenships that you have. Once you have those citizenships, you want to make sure you're claiming the passports, keeping them up to date, making sure you have enough time to where you can travel on any of them at a time. And so Donald Trump has passports that are expired. He's potentially not claiming a citizenship by descent that he's entitled to. And if you do that, you're going to be at a lack of options when you may need it. So those are Donald Trump's potential passport mistakes. Don't you make them. Realize that your passport is the property of the country that issues it, and so having multiple options means you will never be out of control.